This video is brought to you by Skillshare, my favorite online learning community for subjects like art, motion graphics, music production, and productivity. For a limited time, Skillshare is offering a free trial to their amazing learning community with unlimited access to thousands of inspiring classes led by creative professionals like me. The first 1,000 people to use the link in my description will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership. That's skl.sh/Volksgeist10201. Hey guys, it's Volksgeist, and today I'm going to be ranking all the projects by The Weeknd from my least favorite to my favorite. Because I think he's at a really interesting spot in his career, having just released After Hours in March, which a lot of people are looking at as the start of a new, more mature phase for him, while it also contains Blinding Lights, the biggest song of his career, making for a really interesting blend of mainstream success and a more experimental sound than he's done in the recent past. So let's talk about After Hours, House of Balloons, and everything else in between. I also polled my Twitter followers to see what their favorite album was, so before we get into my list, we can look through their rankings to see which projects they prefer. Out of 450 votes, 41% of people voted for After Hours as their favorite, with House of Balloons coming in second with 23% of votes. Beauty Behind the Madness and Starboy tied with 14%, while Echoes of Silence, Kissland, and Thursday got 4%, 3%, and a measly 1% respectively. Now, I forgot to put Dear Melancholy on this poll, but I'll be including that in my list because, while it's not really long enough to be an album, being a short project could be considered a strong suit in my mind, when one of the main failings of the other Weeknd projects is the fact that they're often just way too long. So let's get into it. Okay, so I don't know if this is going to get us off to a controversial start, but Starboy is my least favorite Weeknd project. Most of the songs on Starboy just kind of blur together and pass by without really grabbing my attention. I think its sound leans too heavily on an 80s aesthetic without really getting into it. It kind of just sounds like they wanted to make synthwave for people who don't know what synthwave is. And it's just a pretty shallow aesthetic aside from the first two tracks, Starboy and Party Monster, and the last two tracks, Die For You and I Feel It Coming, which I quite enjoy, with Die For You specifically being one of my favorite songs by The Weeknd. But those 4 tracks don't make up for the fact that the other 14 fly by without really sticking out to me at all. That being said, Starboy is still an iconic era of The Weeknd's career and has been certified 3 times platinum since it came out, so I'm probably in the minority of people who say they don't like Starboy very much. I just thought it was kind of light on memorable tracks, and it was trying to disguise that fact with a really big, overproduced sound that relied way too much on Abel's vocals with not nearly enough emphasis on songwriting and beats. Out of 450 votes on my Twitter poll, Kissland only got 11 votes for being the best Weeknd project, but I think that's probably a little unfair to it, because it's definitely not his worst. There's a lot of cool stuff about Kissland, like its conceptual nature of being inspired by horror movies, with Abel later talking about how he was writing with the work of John Carpenter, David Cronenberg, and Ridley Scott in mind. He said that leaving Toronto to tour and record around the world was almost terrifying for him, and that's where he got the idea to include screams and other horror motifs throughout the record. Kissland also features better production and engineering than the Trilogy mixtapes, which sometimes relied on cheap beats due to Abel's lack of budget as a young, unsigned musician. But Kissland is almost more fun to talk about than it is to listen to. It's very long, with just 10 tracks for almost an hour of music. The tracks just draw out a bit more than I think they should, and I think in many ways Abel didn't go as hard as he could have with the themes of fear and anxiety. It's not something you can just jump into and feel what he was feeling, but I think it was a good show of the potential he would later come to realize. For number 6, I picked My Dear Melancholy. I know it's probably controversial to put My Dear Melancholy this high on the list, because it's not really an album, but I do love this project. It's really only 20 minutes long, which is like a third the length of a regular Weeknd album, but the good part of that shortness is that there's no filler, which honestly comes in spades on a regular Weeknd project. The songs on this project aren't groundbreaking, but they're quite good, and I do come back to this project pretty often compared to Kissland or Starboy. For number 5 and 4, I chose Thursday and Echoes of Silence. I wasn't originally going to list the Trilogy mixtapes separately, but I think that wouldn't be fair to House of Balloons. Because Thursday and Echoes of Silence aren't bad, but they're just not on the same level as House of Balloons, even though they were released within months of each other. I think House of Balloons is pretty much interesting all the way through, but Thursday and Echoes of Silence definitely have moments that are hard to resist skipping through. I think it mostly comes down to songwriting. A lot of tracks on these mixtapes sound like Abel didn't really spend enough time on them, and the only thing holding the experience together is that fancy, luxurious atmosphere that by today's standards has become pretty dated because of Abel's massive influence over the sound of R&B for the last 10 years. Meanwhile, Abel was trying to balance his disturbed, mysterious persona with a desire to be easy to digest, and it just didn't end up being all that compelling. That being said, there are some great moments on Thursday and Echoes of Silence, but they're placed sparsely between tracks that can quickly turn into snooze fests. For number 3, I chose Beauty Behind the Madness. I know Beauty Behind the Madness was Abel's first truly mainstream project, and because of that, he had to give up a lot of the sinister sounds from previous records. But that doesn't mean Beauty Behind the Madness isn't good. This album got really big in the years following its release, going 4 times platinum and still standing as his best-selling record to date. I think it definitely trails in the middle, but thanks to its amazing 5-song run in the beginning, and the 5 tracks at the end being really strong too, I can honestly say that Beauty Behind the Madness aged really well, and it doesn't rely too heavily on a pop sound like Starboy, while also being more digestible for a bigger audience, unlike Kissland. Beauty Behind the Madness is just a really good, accessible album with just enough edge for the hardcore fans to still enjoy it. For number 2, I chose House of Balloons. It's kind of hard to remember or emphasize just how much of a surprise House of Balloons was to the music community. This record completely changed the sound of R&B overnight. Its imagery was vivid and fresh, introducing to the world the sonic atmosphere of drug-fueled benders and freezing nights in Toronto. Its sound was simultaneously familiar yet alien, because we just didn't know what the hell we were listening to. All we had to go off of was the Tumblr art porn artwork, the Drake cosign, the stylish samples, and the missing E in the Weeknd's name. Burial-style vocal samples, techno sounds, and pop choruses immediately separated it from the pack and sent Abel on a fast track to fame, all while remaining mysterious enough for Pitchfork to think The Weeknd was a band in their review. At the time, it was hard to tell if The Weeknd was telling true stories of his life experience or just going down a rabbit hole of imaginative storytelling. And still, almost 10 years later, we don't really know where the character ends and real life begins when it comes to the words of Abel Tesfaye. For number 1, I had to choose After Hours, because I think After Hours shows Abel returning to the dark, mysterious persona and sound he was exploring for the first few years of his career while still making an album that can cater to a massive audience. The result is, I think, the second album of his that has a real chance at being called a classic in the music community. The first, of course, being House of Balloons. After Hours wastes no time featuring 14 tracks that are all really solid, memorable, and I don't skip any of them. It feels like Abel was finally able to deliver on his vision and create a record that truly looks from the perspective of the self-loathing villain he's been teasing his entire career. But After Hours is far more cinematic than anything he's done before, with beautiful, mature production that leaves a lot of room to breathe. Produced in part by Daniel Lopatin of Monotrix Point Never and Metro Boomin, After Hours plays equally with dream pop, new wave, and R&B sounds, never shying away from a cheesy sax solo or a fat bass line. But the story the album tells isn't a new one. There's not a single song on After Hours that breaks rank with the themes Abel established 9 years ago on House of Balloons, but there's one major improvement. He finally found a middle ground between the enigmatic noir sound that made him popular with indie fans and the massive international sound that made him one of the biggest artists in the world. It's definitely something special. So that was my ranking of albums by The Weeknd from least favorite to favorite. It's not supposed to be objective or anything, so before you tell me my opinion is horrible, just remember I'm someone who enjoys The Weeknd as a pretty casual fan. But if you want, you can comment your list too, or follow me on Twitter for more polls in the future. And if you want to pursue something creative, I highly recommend checking out Skillshare. I use Skillshare all the time to help brush up on my video editing and animation skills, and I just can't recommend it enough. The point of Skillshare is that they offer meaningful membership. There are many avenues to explore, real projects to create, and a very good community of people on there. Skillshare empowers users to pursue personal growth and truly better themselves. Their lessons can help you stay inspired, learn how to express yourself, and introduce you to a community of millions of users. And they have many interesting topics covered by industry professionals, from music production, audio engineering, motion graphics, graphic design, video editing, and photography to business and more. Skillshare has no ads, and they're always launching new classes. Some of my YouTube friends even have great classes on there, like Thomas Frank's amazing productivity courses or Ali Abdal's studying and video editing tutorials. From mixing your own music, to producing trap beats, to animating in After Effects, the same software I use, Skillshare has something for everyone. My personal favorite class right now has been William Kessling's class on how to animate a logo in After Effects. It includes a lot of the same techniques I use for my videos, and it's just super helpful if you want to start using the same software I use. So anyway, last but not least, a premium annual membership with Skillshare is super affordable at less than $10 a month. So if you want to join Skillshare and upgrade your meaningful skills while supporting Volksgeist, get your free trial at the link in the description below. That's skl.sh/Volksgeist10201. Clicking the link really helps out the channel.